Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the ARC Digital Transformation Viewpoints podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things related to digital transformation in energy, industrial, and critical infrastructure applications. The podcast is the creation of the ARC Advisory Group Digital Transformation Practice. ARC advises leading companies on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business. To engage further, please like and share our podcasts or reach out directly on Twitter at ARC_advisory, or please go to our website at arcweb.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another ARC Industrial Cybersecurity podcast, where we explore new trends and developments with end users and suppliers of technologies for critical industries. Joining me today for the podcast are Rani, Kehat of Radiflow and James Destro of ServiceNow. I know both of you guys, but I think it would be good if you could just give a real short intro, a bio of yourself for the listeners.
My name is Rani. I'm Chief Information Security Officer in Radiflow. My experience was technical, doing SOC designs, open source intelligence, and industrial control system security.
Yep, I'm James Destro. I'm the head of product for our manufacturing vertical here at ServiceNow. My team's responsible for taking the existing ServiceNow products and extending them into spaces for the manufacturing industry. My background, I started actually as an automation engineer installing control systems back for Exxon many, many moons ago, and since then have graduated into many different software aspects.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, both of you. I'm personally quite familiar with both Radiflow and ServiceNow, but I think it'd be good for our listeners, and Ronnie, you can start this, but if you could give some brief comments about Radiflow, what the company does, what you're trying to solve, and how you're helping clients, as they deal with industrial cybersecurity today.
Yeah, sure. Radiflow started over a decade ago, supplying security solutions to the ICS market. So we were one of the first that started with the SCADA firewalls. After that, obviously, the big players came in, like Palo Alto and Fortinet, with similar solutions. About 6 years ago, we started doing industrial detection systems for OT environments, specializing in OT environments and in OT protocols. And the last couple of years, we've evolved into proactive security, which is how to manage our risk and how to get the correct threat intelligence and vulnerabilities in order to actually see your posture and do proactive acting on procurement of security controls.
Okay, and James, I know that ServiceNow is a partner with Radiflow. So, if you could say a few words about what ServiceNow, I think a lot of people know ServiceNow, but if you could kind of frame how what you do fits in with cybersecurity and the relationship with Radiflow and how that's going to help. Again, I try to always focus the thing about how's that going to help our end users, because that's our target for these podcasts. Sure,
absolutely. So I'm sure many are aware of ServiceNow from an information technology perspective or IT perspective. Strength and heritage in the service management and security workflows and operations management for IT. Earlier this year, we started partnering with Radiflow around how can we take ServiceNow's capabilities, enable that for the operational technology space. Radiflow provides us with a great vast amount of information, and then ServiceNow has now extended into workflows for the operational technology space, specifically around incident management, vulnerability response, security incident response, just to name a few.
I key off when you made the comment about how ServiceNow is well known in the IT world, and certainly they are. But with that said, a big thing that we talk about at ARC and we find a lot of our clients struggling with is there is a push towards IT/OT cybersecurity convergence, and there's lots of meanings of that term, but it's this collaboration, integration of their efforts. So, I'd like to get your views on that. And again, I'll start with Ronnie, but, what do you see as, do you see that happening, number one? What do you see as the challenges people will face, particularly with your SOC background? What kind of benefits are they going to get out of that? And, what are the challenges and risks and things like that?
Right. I'll try and be as brief as possible because it's not a short answer. But the first benefit is financial. I mean, it makes much more sense to defend, to have an holistic view of defense and cybersecurity. The term IT and OT, I think, is slowly dissolving. Basically, we're talking about processes, we're talking about production. They span across multi-silos of technology. Some of them could be in the cloud, some of them can be physical, and they're all joined to the same production process. So these boundaries are currently a little bit kind of dissolving and not really describing correctly the threat landscape or the client's system. Today, when we look at any production environment, it will start from anywhere from the enterprise, for example, SAP, and it will go down into the production floor. Commands are sent via data channels. Controllers today are working on TCP/IP networks. Some of the production environments are even service-oriented. So the convergence is here. The thing that hasn't converged are people. We haven't converged our mentality between engineers and cyber people. And I think James can elaborate on that kind of bridge that a platform of information exchange can help bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're starting to see is organizations are starting to form a converged organization. The people are starting to work together. However, there are differences in expertise that are needed in those organizations. IT brings the strength of having done, standardized processes around incident management, change management, security management for many years in a standardized process and govern that globally, where operational technology brings the expertise of knowing exactly how each one of these control systems or integrated systems affect plants or operating and in that environment. And you need both in order to draw this expertise together. So it takes the strengths of the IT processes, yet the operational expertise of how OT could impact. Specifically when doing that, there's a difference of context, right? Understanding in the IT environment, context is driven by users using services to, satisfy their need of a website or satisfy their need for a desktop. In the OT environment, it's much different. The context is much more consequential, right? These are controlling physical machines. It is controlling massive processes. And because of that operational context is critical.
Again, you guys are great. You're feeding me great segues here to my questioning. It plays well with what we see as well. Resources, when I talk to people, resources is a major, major issue. And I've been a big proponent, and many of the clients, I did not because they didn't follow me necessarily, but everybody's kind of come to the same conclusion that the best place to solve that is by engaging with the IT. But one of the challenges they have, and you mentioned this, is this difference of culture, and it's a big issue in bringing them together. What do you see people doing, or what could be done to facilitate that integration? I mean, I've heard people talk about, that they try to, there's issues about cross training, but that doesn't seem to be the issue as much as culture sometimes. It's not, first of all, there's a distrust in some cases because of the different knowledge base. But what kind of things do you see people doing, or what do you think people should be doing to try to break down these barriers, these cultural barriers, and bring them together and things like that? Because I know IT and OT people, I like both of them. But they do, and they both have skills. That's the problem. Sometimes the others don't recognize that. But anyhow, I'll let you talk rather than me give you my opinions. So, Rani, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would say, and again, I come from an engineering background, studied mechanical engineering, so is James, and we went, where the fun is, which is IT. So,
usually we say it's the dark side, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to say that's where the money is, but so I said where the fun is. But anyway, I'll give an example of culture. So people are talking culture, and I would like to give an example, because I think an example will explain it in the best way. We need to learn the other's mindset. Now, for example, an engineer will look at an IT guy. If the IT guy hasn't studied the engineer's mindset, and he would come across a little bit flippant. Why don't we just reboot that, or why don't we just disconnect that, or why don't we just, it's virtual anyway, and these things don't exist in his world. And rebooting, or let's patch and all that stuff that's so easily done in IT, you can't do it in his environment, in the engineer's environment. On the other side of looking at it, an engineer hasn't got a mindset of cyber. An engineer, when he looks at systems, he looks at safety and functionality, and usually the methodologies come from the physical environment. He doesn't, what component can fail, so I'll do a redundant component, and I will do some kind of controller, and so on and so forth. And he works according to probabilities of actual elements, failing or not failing. He doesn't actually look at sabotage, at the fact of what is the cyber attack vector. You talk to an engineer and he will say, oh, if that switch goes, I'm fine because I've got another one in redundancy. But the IT guy or the cyber guy will say, yes, but they've got a heartbeat between them. It means if I attack this switch, I will attack the other switch. You can have 10 of them. I'll attack all of them at the same time. So you don't think you're protected because you've got redundancy. So these are the kind of conversations that have to go on between the two different disciplines. Each one has to understand the landscape or the environment the other works in. So it is a process that teams have to come together, and each one to explain to the other what he does and what his constraints are and what the value can be from each one of the disciplines.
Great. And I would build onto that around simplification as we start to look at the IT processes that are in place today, and we start to talk to automation or engineering. They look at them, and the first thing that I've heard from all of our customers is, please don't burden me with a new process. Please don't make it as complicated as those IT processes are. And as we look at that and we internalize that as ServiceNow coming from the IT background, of course, we say, wow, the IT professionals, it is their full-time job to do this. They have all of the time, they have all the processes, they've standardized it, and they've optimized it so far across. As you look at automation or engineering, their responsibility is to keep the plant and the facility running. And automation is a support function for that. Right. And that means that their job entitles more than just supporting the computers or supporting the control systems that are in place today. And because of that, we need to simplify the processes for them. And so we've done dramatic simplifications in ServiceNow to make it so that automation feels comfortable with using the processes and has their own set of processes and procedures that are specific and meet the needs of the actual factory or the plant in terms of how they're doing that from an ICS level.
And when you just said automation, you mean automation of the processes, not automation of the systems. That's an old automation engineer, right? I mean, just to clarify it for our listeners, and I always find that very interesting because when I talk to IT people, we use the same terms for different purposes, which is good. And I know, guess you both have engineering backgrounds. I worked as an engineer as well. In that regard, though, I do find, and one thing we have found is, there's certainly a lack of people to be able to maintain the systems. They're very knowledgeable engineers. They know a lot about networks. They know a lot about systems. Some of them are IT. They like IT, so they're happy to dig in and stuff like that. But we find that they don't have the tools they need to maintain the security. And there's things like asset inventories and vulnerability lists and stuff like that. And I know you both have tools to support that. And I think that's part of your relationship, actually, is how to bring those together. So can you kind of just tell me a little about where your tools fit? How's that going to help an automation person or a company who's doing, whether it's converged or not, whether it's shifting the load to another person or just helping the person in the plant? But because, as you were talking, I got the impression you were saying, well, they don't want these new processes, and that's true. So how do your tools allow them to do what they want to do in an easy way without adopting a whole bunch of new processes and things? So I don't know who wants to go first. Ronnie, I keep picking you, but
yeah, I can describe very high level. I mean, Radiflow is, in one sense, we also have our own hardware and also software solutions. So Where we meet ServiceNow is at the bottom level of collecting the data acquisition. So we are an OT company. We know how to collect the data safely from an OT and securely from an OT environment. And we take that data up to the ServiceNow platform. ServiceNow obviously has a lot of plugins that we don't, and has visibility to a lot of other sources of information that is very important, that can be correlated for anything that has to do with forensics or incident response and different workflows that have to do with cybersecurity in OT environments. The software that we supply, and again, we're like an ISV with ServiceNow, is either analyzing certain attack vectors, so on the security operations side, whereby alerts and patterns and anomalies and so on and so forth, because Radiflow understands the OT environment and can send up to the ServiceNow security management system the alerts and the incidents we see. And on another level, our software also provides, and again, it's a slightly different product, but also to be integrated into the ServiceNow platform, is how to understand the threat likelihood in your system by taking in threat intelligence, by taking in vulnerabilities, by taking in attack vectors, APTs from different adversaries. And this information is only part of the picture that is slowly built. It's just a few pixels in a big picture that is built in the ServiceNow platform. I'll just give a small example. For example, we don't know, because we sit on the wire, or even if you're sitting on the host base, we don't know who's the owner of the asset. We don't know if the asset is under service of the vendor or not. Is it obsolete or not? These are not things that we see on the wire, but it's critical to understand when you're dealing with an incident, if you can patch it, if you can't patch it, if you've got a service agreement, who's the owner, where's the geolocation of this asset, and so on and so forth. A lot of information we're missing as Radiflow, and that can be supplemented on the ServiceNow platform.
Absolutely. And then I'd bring on top of that the workflows that we bring from a ServiceNow perspective allows for a couple of things. The first is in terms of leveraging best practice in I don't want to call it necessarily the standardization of the processes, but the unification, and they allow for how did I solve that particular incident or problem for this type of control system or this type of environment in one facility can now start to be leveraged in another facility. We capture that in what's called knowledge management, bringing out the best practices, solving and looking at the root cause analysis of them, and creating knowledge articles around how those particular issues were resolved. That leads to what we call process mining. And process mining isn't looking at the data in your factory or your plant and mining those processes. For ServiceNow, process mining is looking at the operational workflows that you've done and helping you determine what is the next best action that you should take in order to solve those problems. So recommending what should be the resolution step, or recommending what should be the next change process that you implement to actually solve that problem faster, get the system up and running. When you bring that kind of knowledge and recommendations, you start to gain the trust of engineering as they start to see that it has not an IT flavor, but it is much more of an OT flavor of knowledge that we've introduced as part of the applications.
Just to clarify, ServiceNow, I mean, as you mentioned, I mentioned too at the beginning, is well known in the IT world, but the way you just described the processes and things like that, is this something that an engineer in a plant would do it, or are you focusing it more on this thing about the IT-OT convergence, where you're trying to bring that expertise or knowledge to help the IT SOC person, be it SOC person or IT person, to support the plant? You know what I'm asking?
Right. It's closer to aligned to what we've heard called manufacturing IT. Right. It is the IT support team that's inside of the plant or inside of the factory that's directly supporting the industrial control systems. They own them. They own the manufacturing applications. Right. That team is able to leverage these knowledge bases, knowledge articles to really get this and keep the systems running as efficiently as possible.
And do you have like a case-based kind of system in there? Is that part of it?
Yeah, it's knowledge base. Yeah.
Knowledge base and okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
What
I could
about?
just jump
Go
in.
ahead, please. Please.
Yeah, I'm just, I'll give another example of how consolidated or, one pane of glass kind of for your process and procedures helps. For example, every engineering plant will have a standard operational procedure. Usually, if you're in high critical areas, it's been authorized by the safety guys. But you have an SOP for normal day-to-day production, use cases. So if something goes bad, if something stops working, if something, is starting to shift in its values or whatever. Now, this can happen for many reasons, not necessarily cyber. It can happen from any, operator fault, or it could be from, electricity fluctuation. But you have a standard operational procedure that's been going on for 30 years, and you're very good at it. And you have that on the ServiceNow platform. The only thing we now are helping is bringing in the cyber origin or the cyber threat or the possibility that incident has originated in a cyber attack, and does it fall into a standard operation procedure that is currently already existent. So every time we do an assessment with a client, we identify the assets, and to each asset we then assign kind of what type of asset it is. Is it an asset that you can disconnect from a network? And if you do, what will be the consequences? Will the production fail, or will the production continue normally? Let's say, is this asset, for example, can you disconnect the controller from the actuator? Are you allowed to do that? Now, all these things are already existent, all these operational procedures. We just need to bring in the additional cyber aspect of it, because, cyber attacks have gone up 400% the last couple of years. That's one number I've heard being thrown out there. And there has to be a workflow that automation guys can feel comfortable with when I phone them up and say, somebody has just cryptolocked all of your data that is sitting in your historian. That will fall into a standard operational procedure they're familiar with. And they can look up this procedure in a platform like ServiceNow. It's just the flows of the information, and when do you declare the incident, and to what kind of incident response platform you go into. Okay, so that's where things come together between the disciplines in the automation and the ICS world, and the detection and the disciplines in the cyber or the IT world.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, James? You don't have to, but I'm just giving you the opportunity.
No, I think that's great description and a great explanation of how the partnership and the communication happens between Radiflow and ServiceNow.
All right, let me same topic obviously, but I just want to shift to, again, I'm using my view of the world and things like that. And one thing we've talked a lot about at ARC is this shift. There's two aspects. We kind of break cybersecurity in the model we use into two parts. The part we call passive defenses, which is really putting in things like anti-malware and firewalls and things like that. And then the other, which I call it passive, because once you put them in, you just rely on them to do their job. And versus active, which is more where you're responding to something that's odd. Now, the passive also requires a lot of management of vulnerability. You have to maintain that passive to maintain it. So with those two kinds of things, is your partnership or your products, are they supporting both sides of that, and how, I guess, is my question. What are you doing to support the passive? Because there's people who just have passive defenses. That's all they have, and their focus is vulnerability management. I can imagine how ServiceNow and Radiflow fit that very well. But what about on the active side? Is that something that's also you're supporting, and how are you doing that, or what are you doing in that area? So I don't know who wants to go first. Rani?
Yeah, I would say we are more on the proactive side than the passive. We're sitting outside of the network. We're not intrusive in any way to the production environments. And we're listening to the traffic of the environments and seeing if something fishy is going on. And then obviously sending it up to the ServiceNow platform for further investigations, because ServiceNow can also receive additional information from other security controllers that are in the system. And from that information, we also, with our risk platform, we start building kind of a picture of what kind of APT or what kind of attack could be happening now. Again, to help and be proactive. Additional, that is more on the security operation, the SecOps side or the SOC side of the business. But additional, we're now being a lot more proactive in the sense that we want to put the right security controllers in place according to your threat landscape, to understand exactly what are the attacks that we see, what are the adversaries, how do they work, what are the major vulnerabilities that are currently in your network, and from that, draw a picture by doing kind of a virtual simulation attacks and giving you proactive advice on what kind of mitigations to put in place and what kind of process and procedures. It's not just technology that are missing that have to be put in place. So in a way, we can be saying something like you have a big gap in managing a third-party chain of supply, or having a policy for remote access maintenance. Now that recommendation can then be applied on the ServiceNow platform as another workflow. So that's how we're becoming more proactive. We're not waiting for the attack to happen and to react and to try and distinguish the fire, but be prepared and be as proactive as possible as the threat landscape changes.
I would definitely agree. It's on the proactive side and risk-based side, right? Essentially leveraging risk calculations and understanding the profile of vulnerabilities, attack vectors in the operational technology space, but then doing proactive management and planning for the changes to the environment as it accounts for what changes could be made in a production schedule, for example. I can't take the system offline to do a patch right now. I need to do that and aggregate them together and put the whole change procedure together in the context of when operations can take the outage or take the downtime. And so that is more of a proactive and risk-based approach, because you can't patch everything. We're never going to be able to keep all of the vulnerabilities done, but you can also put mitigations in place, right? You talked about kind of the passive nature. That could be changing firewall settings or control system settings so that the vulnerability is mitigated from an environmental base, not environmental factors of how networks are segregated, for example, rather than always applying the patch. And so that is where the risk-based approach really starts to take hold.
All right, let me change another question here. Another area that we're doing a lot at ARC now is I'm doing some reports on connected workers. It's just this thing of a lot of outside support. But from the perspective of what we're talking about, I see this is opening up more opportunities, I think, for MSSPs to be able to support companies. I mean, one thing is to support it with your own internal SOC, and there's a lot of big companies that have those kind of resources. There's a lot more companies, to be honest, who don't have those kind of resources internally, and they're going to third parties, all kinds of things. Some might be an IT service provider. It could be their automation company, automation in the ARC sense of control systems. So I'm just wondering, are you working with any of them, or is that an area that you see an opportunity? Because my thinking here, that's what I don't want to give you, frame your answer or anything, but it's just that you have somebody who's an MSSP and he supports 100 different companies. He doesn't know anything about all these companies, even if he just, there's no possible way he could keep track of all that stuff. It's like the people who support our company. We have an IT group that supports us, and they don't know our company, but they need to have some kind of tools in place to be able to help them know what's to be done in that case. So are you working with them too? I would think there's a big opportunity there for both of you in that sense of helping those kinds of companies move into that market. Are you doing that in any way? Or so, Rani, because
yeah, I mean, the MSP market is our best growing market currently, client-wise. The last, again, couple of years, especially the last couple of years, we're having volume of, and not, it used to be only high critical infrastructure, power generation, gas, oil. But now we're getting manufacturing, we're getting food, we're getting mining, we're getting chemicals, we're getting packaging. All those are coming in, and those are exactly the kind of clients that wish to work via an MSP. And one of the things we offer, obviously, is our MSPs take them on. We do a course to the client, not to the MSP. The MSP is already trained, but to the client to understand a little bit of the cyber origin and the cyber threat landscape. So basically, a team is formed. Somebody from the automation, somebody from the MSP, somebody from the vendor. So we're like a small team. And yes, definitely. I mean, the numbers of end users that are now turning for this kind of service at MSPs is amazing.
And I would add on to that, obviously ServiceNow from an IT perspective leverages MSPs extensively, right? We have many that actually run ServiceNow for our customers. So there's actually two levels of MSPs that we're seeing on the OT side. However, the first is managing the ServiceNow environment as an extension of the IT environment that they do today. So being able to manage ServiceNow proactively for their customers, but still have it as a platform where the SOC and the vulnerabilities and the workflows are still handled internally into the company. The second level is that SOC is fully operationalized by a third party, in which case they're actually looking at the alerts that are coming in and making the recommendations about what to be done or what should be done by the actual company, and then proactively sending those alerts, sending those workflows and coordinating with the company. So we're seeing those two levels start to emerge. I would say it's a good 30-40% of the customers that we're engaging with are moving towards one of those two models, mostly in the former model, right, where they're leveraging an extension of the existing ServiceNow MSP relationship. But we're in the smaller or medium-sized companies, they do start to see a fully managed environment where the SOC and the full operational procedures are actually run by one of the more technically oriented or security-oriented companies that we work with.
Okay, I'm getting a kind of an indication here that we're running out of time. So, I've really enjoyed this. I could talk to you guys all day. Rani and I have spoken a lot in the past, and we do get. I think we're both talkers. And James, you don't do bad either. But anyhow, I just sadly, I think we pretty much run out of time here. So I want to thank both of you. It's been a very enjoyable discussion, and I hope the listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm sure they will. A lot of, as I mentioned, we get a lot of questions about IT and OT convergence and things like that. And I think we hit on some really good topics today. So thank you both for participating today. And, thank you listeners for listening. So with that said, I will say goodbye and take care and have a nice holiday, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, James. Bye, Sid.
Bye, Rani. Bye, Sid.
Bye.